Samuel chapter 4. Let's look at the first 11 verses before we get into our discussion. And the word of Samuel came to Israel. Now Israel went out to battle against the Philistines and encamped beside Ebenezer, and the Philistines encamped in Aphek. Then the Philistines put themselves in battle array against Israel, and when they joined battle, Israel was defeated by the Philistines, who were killed about 4,000 men of the army in the field. And when the people had come into the camp, the elders of Israel said, "Why has the Lord defeated us today before the Philistines? Let us bring the ark of the covenant of the Lord from Shiloh to us, that when it comes among us, it may save us from the hand of our enemies." So the people sent to Shiloh that they might bring from there the ark of the covenant of the Lord of hosts, who dwells between the cherubim. And the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were there with the ark of the covenant of God. And when the ark of the covenant of the Lord came into the camp, all Israel shouted so loudly that the earth shook. Now the Philistines heard the noise of the shout. They said, "What does the sound of this great shout in the camp of the Hebrews mean?" Then they understood that the ark of the Lord had come into the camp. So the Philistines were afraid, for they said, "God has come into the camp." And they said, "Woe to us, for such a thing has never happened before. Woe to us! Who will deliver us from the hand of these mighty gods? These are the gods who struck the Egyptians with all the plagues in the wilderness. Be strong and conduct yourselves like men, you Philistines, that you do not become servants of the Hebrews, as they have been to you. Conduct yourselves like men and fight." So the Philistines fought, and Israel was defeated, and every man fled to his tent. There was a great slaughter, and there fell of Israel 30,000 foot soldiers. Also, the ark of God was captured, and the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, died. Okay, so a lot of this is not a big surprise, right? Because we've seen some prophecies to this effect. Last time, real quickly, we looked at some characteristics of the ark. Notice it was wood overlaid with pure gold. Its dimensions are 2.5 cubits by 1.5 cubits by 1.5 cubits, or about 45 inches by 27 inches by 27 inches. There are 4 rings in the corner for carrying it with wooden poles. On top was the mercy seat, which was a lid, and it was 2.5 cubits long and 1.5 cubits wide, so it matched the dimensions of the ark that it was a lid for. There were cherubim at both ends of the mercy seat, with their wings stretched above the mercy seat. And it contained the 2 stone tablets of the 10 Commandments that Moses made, a golden jar of manna, and Aaron's rod. And the Lord dwells between the cherubim. We saw that in the text we just read. We also see that in the first verse of the 99th Psalm. So this is kind of where we left off. We had a picture of it up here, or an artist's interpretation of it. I'm not sure of the details other than what was said, but it should have looked something like this. You can see the cherubim on either side with their wings spread out. You can see the poles there for carrying it. Okay, so there's a battle here, and I kind of try to show this. I don't know that you really get a whole lot from these maps, but you know, I've got Shiloh over here on the right, if you can tell, and the battle, the 2 encamps are marked there in the middle around that little red explosion showing you where they fought between Aphek and Ebenezer, and then you can see Joppa over there on the coast. And this would be in the area of Israel today. I looked and then I didn't put in the notes and I forgot to write it down, but I think over on the left side, we're kind of near Tel Aviv when you get to the coast. And then over here where Shiloh is, that's actually in what is today the West Bank. So that's part of the area that was partitioned for the Palestinians when the United Nations tried to divide that area up, which has since been taken control of by the Israeli government. And that's where you're always seeing about a lot of settlements, because it's basically Palestinian land, but Israelis are constantly moving into that area. So that's over in the West Bank, and that's where Shiloh is. And it's probably about 20 miles, this dotted line for the march. We'll talk about that a little bit more later, but it's not worlds away in distance. Okay. So the Israelites are defeated in the first battle. So the elders decide to bring the Ark of God to the front lines. Why should the elders seem surprised that they were defeated? In verse 4:3b, it said, "Why has the Lord defeated us today before the Philistines?" They're asking like they don't know. Why did they expect victory? Who did they expect to give them victory?
Yeah, one of the things, with Joshua, it's just victory after victory.
Yeah, with Joshua, it's victory after victory after victory. And when you get into the Judges, sometimes you see some losses, and sometimes you see some wins, but who's on their side when they win? The Lord, right? God. So they are expecting that God's going to be on their side, and they have enough faith to recognize that if God's on their side, they're not going to lose. So when they lose, they're surprised. Why was it that God wasn't on their side?
That's the whole wrong mentality. We don't want God on our
Yeah.
side. We want to be on God's side.
Yeah, that's okay. So really, we want to be on God's side. Yeah, that's a good point to stress. But they're going into this thinking that God and them, that God's going to give them victory. What have we seen so far that would tell us why God does not want to grant them victory in this case? Yeah, they've abandoned him. Who in particularly? The priest, right? We've seen Eli and Phinehas, the sons of the high priest Eli. We've seen them offending God in the way they're offering sacrifice. They're not offering sacrifice to God in the way that they're supposed to. And God has come to Eli, their father, and told him he's upset with him because of his part in this and not trying to rebuke them, and has also told them that his sons are going to die in battle. This is fulfillment of prophecy. Now, I don't know if Eli kept this to himself. We saw last time that Eli accepted it and seemed to understand that it was going to happen. He didn't repent or try to do anything about it, but he just said, the Lord's going to do what the Lord's going to do. But others seem to be surprised that this prophecy is being fulfilled. So why did they decide to bring the ark from Shiloh to the battlefront? Eddie.
In their mind, the ark represented God,
Yeah.
and so they thought that if they brought God to the battlefront, then they would win that way.
Right, so Eddie says the ark in their mind represents God. Is that true? Yeah, it represents his presence. Yeah, represent the right word? I mean, it's an okay word, but does it sell a little short?
He said that's where his presence.
Yeah, he said that's where his presence was. So I don't disagree with the statement, but maybe we can even make it a little stronger because, oh, yes, go ahead. Yeah. Yeah, amen. So if you couldn't hear that, the comment was they were treating the ark like a magic charm rather than submitting to God. And I think this comes back to what you said, right? They're trying to force God to be on their side rather than being on God's side, which is what you said we need to do. And they're forcing God to be on their side by kind of bringing him with them. Was there a comment over here? Yeah.
Yeah, and I kind of go back to the first question. It should be a surprise that they were surprised. If they're using the ark in this way, they're looking to God to serve their wins.
Yes.
The other way around.
Yeah.
Just to bring up an obvious point, like that's so analogous.
Yeah.
Like I'm guilty of that all the time, right? I'm like not doing anything for God, but then the minute I need him, expecting him to be there for me.
Yeah, yes. Go ahead, Eddie.
And the other thing that strikes me here is the idea that if they bring God closer to the front, then that way they're going to win because he's closer.
Yeah.
Where distance has never mattered at any time in the past, but again, in their mind, they're thinking in a human way.
Yeah, and yeah, so in their mind, they're thinking that the ark needs to be present in order for them to win the battle. And I've got a question in my mind. Don't let me forget, because I want to get this comment first.
And along with that, I don't want to downplay the importance of the ark either. I mean, it is true what Dan said, that is where God's presence was. So they're not wrong in thinking that this is, more than just symbolic in a way, but the way that they were using it was certainly, I would say, bastardizing the glory of it.
Yeah.
And in addition to that, we know that, just kind of my head a little bit,
Yeah.
when Eli hears about the ark,
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. We'll look at that in just a second.
This relationship, this interaction with the ark on a regular basis, and that's what destroyed him,
Yeah, you're kind of answering the question I was thinking of before I got to answer it. So before I got to ask it, which is good. So you're pointing out that there is a sense in which God is present in the ark, And so even though Eddie is right in that distance doesn't matter to God, we see that all the time and time again, that God is not limited by those sort of matters. But I'm kind of curious, I'm not sure, so I'm throwing this out there. Are there instances where the ark's presence seems to be an important factor in God doing what he says he's going to do?
Well, we're going to see it in essence in the Philistine scene.
Yeah, right. What we're going to see, kind of a preview, we're going to see when the Philistines get, not spoiler warning, when the Philistines get the ark, there's going to bring plagues on them. But it doesn't bring plagues like everywhere all at once, right? It kind of follows the ark from city to city. It's in one city, and then they have to deal with it, and they say, well, we can't deal with this. And the lords of the Philistines are going to say, well, let's move it over here. And what happens over here? They get stuck with the plagues. So there does seem to be a sense, even though you're correct that God is not limited, there does seem to be a sense that the location of the ark does have some significance. Go ahead.
Yeah, just like what you're saying, it's not necessarily that the ark being involved is the problem,
Yeah.
because like in the Battle of Jericho, they marched the ark around too, or when they're crossing the Jordan,
Yeah.
that ark
Yeah.
helped them
Yeah.
cross through.
Yeah.
But it's rather, that was God's instruction versus they're just thinking, well, maybe we'll win like this.
Right. And so, but I think I really like the point that several people have made. I think you were the first to make it, that we need to be on God's side rather than have God on our side. And this, to me, is the ultimate expression of sort of forcing God to be on your side. Eddie's pointing out, if God wanted them to win, they would have won even though the ark was in Shiloh. But now they're thinking, well, we'll take God with us and we'll kind of force him to win this battle for us. And guess what? It doesn't work. So, the same with the Philistines, God dwells between the cherubim, that got mentioned here. So yes, it is, I think represented is a perfectly good word, but there is a sense in which the Bible itself says that God dwells between the cherubim. And we don't want to use that to limit God, right? We don't want to say, well, God isn't everywhere, he isn't in heaven, he's stuck between these two cherubim. No, God's power extends throughout the universe, but in some sense, God says that he dwells between the cherubim. So why didn't this work? And I think we've already answered this question, but I want to point out that even the Philistines were worried that this plan would work. They said God destroyed the Egyptians in the wilderness. Okay, strictly speaking, this is not true. It wasn't in the wilderness, but the Philistines may have been slightly confused on the details, but they had still heard about what had happened in Egypt, even if they didn't get the story quite straight, and they took it quite seriously. So they understand the power of God, and like the Hebrews, they think that power is in the ark. And now the ark is there, they're worried. Go ahead.
And something else really strikes me here. When we first see the ark being built, and God gives Moses the instructions about how the ark is to be transported, only the highest of the priests would go in and would cover the ark before the ones who were going to carry it could even see it.
Yeah.
Yet now it seems like it's on display
Yeah.
for the Israelites and the Philistines
Yeah.
to be able to see it.
Yeah, I think.
It's already lost its holy.
Yeah, that's a good point. It was supposed to be, what Eddie was saying, if you couldn't hear, it was supposed to be covered before they transported it, so people other than the high priest couldn't see it. There's no indication of that here, and I think we may see sort of some of the effects of that a little bit later, if you want a little hint at where we're headed. Go ahead.
And along with that too, earlier you were fast, I meant like the whole story.
Okay.
They were cheating on God, and now they're being, completely carefree,
Yeah.
right? Because with the ark of the
Yeah.
presence of God,
Yeah.
and it seems like the Philistines have more reverence for God.
Yeah. If you could, it seems like the Philistines may have even more, a little bit more reverence because they're the way they're misusing the ark here in this instance. Okay, so the Philistines, as we saw, they captured the ark. So the Philistines fought, and Israel was defeated, and every man fled to his tent. There was a great slaughter, and there fell of Israel 30,000 foot soldiers. Also, the ark of God was captured, and the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, died. This fulfilled the prophecy of 1 Samuel 2:34, which was partially reiterated in chapter 3. And so we've seen 30,000 soldiers fall in the second battle. We saw 4,000 fall in the first battle. So they actually got slaughtered worse when they brought the ark. So coming back to this idea that just having the ark is not going to win you battles if God is not on your side. And just as not having the ark there at the battlefront is not going to lose you battles if he is. But I noticed that and maybe all of Israel sinned. I don't know. I've heard that comment like said Israel was sinning. But most of what we've seen so far, the characters we've seen up to this point, mostly it's been Eli and not Eli, but it's been Hophni and Phinehas who we've seen as sinners. We've seen Eli, his sin in that as well. But we've also seen people like Samuel, who's very faithful. We've seen his mother, Hannah, who's very faithful. We've seen Hannah's husband seem to be very faithful. So the characters we've seen so far, it's kind of a mix of people who are dedicated to God and people who aren't. And even though Hophni and Phinehas were sacrificing incorrectly, who was pointing out that it was wrong when they did that? Yeah, just ordinary people who brought their sacrifices. They were saying, wait a minute, that's not how you're supposed to do that. So there are righteous people in Israel at this time, and yet 34,000 people just got slaughtered in this battle. So is the sinner always the only person who suffers for his sin? No. You know, we see that time and time again. So that puts an added responsibility on us, right? Like if we're in sin, like nobody's getting hurt but me, right? Is that always true? You know, here we saw a great slaughter that really seems to stem primarily, I'm sure there was other sins in Israel, but primarily from God's displeasure with Hophni and Phinehas. Okay. So the death of Eli, let's look at this next text real quick. 12 through 22. Then a man of Benjamin ran from the battle line the same day and came to Shiloh with his clothes torn and dirt on his head. When he came, there was Eli sitting on a seat by the wayside, watching, for his heart trembled for the ark of God. And when the man came to the city and told it, all the city cried out. When Eli heard the noise of the outcry, he said, "What does the sound of this tumult mean?" And the man came quickly and told Eli. Verse 15. Eli was 98 years old, and his eyes were so dim that he could not see. Then the man said to Eli, "I am he who came from the battle, and I fled today from the battle line." And he said, "What happened, my son?" So the messenger answered and said, "Israel has fled before the Philistines, and there has been a great slaughter among the people. Also your two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, are dead, and the ark of God has been captured." Then it happened, when he made mention of the ark of God, that Eli fell off the seat backwards by the side of the gate, and his neck was broken, and he died, for the man was old and heavy, and he had judged Israel 40 years. Now his daughter-in-law, Phinehas' wife, was with child, due to be delivered, and when she heard the news that the ark of God was captured, and that her father-in-law and her husband were dead, she bowed herself and gave birth, for her labor pains came upon her. And about the time of her death, the women who stood by her said to her, "Do not fear, for you have borne a son." But she did not answer, nor did she regard it. Then she named the child Ichabod, saying, "The glory has departed from Israel, because the ark of God has been captured, and because of her father-in-law and her husband." And she said, "The glory has departed from Israel, for the ark of God has been captured." Okay. So one of the things that we saw there, that was mentioned before, was how Eli seems more concerned about the ark. And you can see, he knows it's coming, right? Before he's told, he's sitting there, what's he worried about? He's worried about the ark, right? Because God has prophesied what's going to happen to him. So he knows it's coming. And it doesn't say he was worrying about his sons. He says he's worrying about the ark. He finds out his son has died. It's confirmed that God has done what God had said he was going to do. It's confirmed that the ark is lost, and that's the thing that puts him over the edge. When the thing that he's worried about finally comes to pass, he falls back, hits his head, and dies. And I had a quick note here. A Benjamite runs from the battle of Shiloh. Jewish tradition says this was Saul. I don't think that's the case, but you might hear that. There's no reason to believe this, but Saul was a Benjamite. The fact that this runner made it to Shiloh in the same day as the battle shows how close the Philistines were to Shiloh. So that's why I'd say it's probably about 20 miles. If it was much farther than that, you know, if it was 30 miles maybe, but if it was 40 or 50 miles, he would not have made this journey in a day on foot. Okay, so recap here. Hophni and Phinehas die. Eli dies. The Masoretic text, the Hebrew text says he's 98 years old. The Septuagint actually says 90. The Syriac says 78, but they all agree that he was very old. The ark is lost. Eli's line is not extinguished. So the prophecy had said, "And it shall come to pass that everyone who is left in your house will come and bow down to him for a piece of silver and a morsel of bread, and say, 'Please put me in one of your priestly positions, that I may eat a piece of bread.'" So people are going to be left in Eli's house, and in fact, we see his grandson being born, Ichabod, right after this. So Phinehas has a son born after he dies. Phinehas' wife names the son Ichabod, meaning without glory or inglorious, because God's glory, the ark was lost. Phinehas had at least one other son and eventually a grandson, because when we get to chapter 14, we're going to read about Elijah, the son of Ahitub, Ichabod's brother, the son of Phinehas, the son of Eli, the Lord's priest in Shiloh. So Eli's descendants continue to be high priests, as the prophecy said, but according to God's word, they would bow down to the priest that God would raise up, which of course was Samuel. Samuel has been identified as a priest in verse 235. He's been identified as a prophet in chapter 3, and in a little bit he's going to be identified as a judge in chapter 7. So Samuel has all these roles: prophet, priest, and judge of Israel. Okay. I've been facing the wrong way. So were there any thoughts or questions that I missed? Okay, great.
Just one thing that, just to, it's just further solidified everything you already said, but there's such a cool parallel between verse 6 and verse 14, where it's almost word for word. They say, what is that great noise? Except the first time it's the Philistines asking, and they think, surely it's God.
Yeah.
And the next time it's Eli asking, it's like, nope, it ain't God.
Yeah, yeah. So if I understood you correctly, you're talking about the parallel between the Philistines hearing the noise when the ark arrives and Eli.
What does the sound of this great noise mean? And then Eli later says, what does the sound of this
Yeah.
great noise mean?
I had not noticed this. There's a parallel. The first sound, the Philistines asking, what is this great noise? And it was the soldiers of Israel rejoicing that the ark had come to battle. Yeah, and they think surely it's God. And then you have, a little bit later, you have Eli saying the same thing. What does this great noise mean? And it's the noise of people who are finding out that they just got defeated in battle. So I wanted to look briefly at the part of Psalm 78, verses 60 through 64. So he forsook the tabernacle of Shiloh, the tent he had placed among men, and delivered his strength into captivity and his glory into the enemy's hands. He also gave his people over to the sword and was furious with his inheritance. The fire consumed their young men, and their maidens were not given in marriage. Their priests fell by the sword, and their widows made no lamentation. So Psalm 78 covers a lot of territory. It doesn't specifically say that it's happening at this time, but it's talking about a time when the tabernacle is in Shiloh. And we saw before that the tabernacle actually stood in Shiloh for over 300 years. So this is not unique to this period in Samuel, but this reminds me a lot of this particular section. So it may be dealing with it definitely seems to be dealing with the end of the tabernacle being in Shiloh. And delivered his strength into captivity and his glory in enemies' hands. What was his strength and his glory? What do you think that is? What would Phinehas' wife say his glory was? We just read.
His presence in the ark.
Yeah, the ark, right? She literally just names her son without glory because the glory had just been taken away by the Philistines capturing the ark. So his strength and his glory are taken into captivity. So this sounds like the ark being taken away, which is what we just saw happen here. And then their priests fell by the sword, and their widows made no lamentation. Does this remind you of anybody? I don't know about you. It reminded me of Hophni, Phinehas, and Phinehas' wife. The two priests fall by the sword, and Phinehas' widow, she just gives up. and just has her son and then dies. Okay, anything else on chapter 4? We'll jump into chapter 5. Okay, so we're going to read about, we'll read all of chapter 5. Chapter 5 is very short, just 12 verses. Then the Philistines took the ark of God and brought it from Ebenezer to Ashdod. When the Philistines took the ark of God, they brought it into the house of Dagon and set it by Dagon. And when the people of Ashdod arose early in the morning, there was Dagon fallen on his face up to the earth before the ark of the Lord. So they took Dagon and set it in the place again. And when they arose early the next morning, there was Dagon fallen on his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord. The head of Dagon and both the palms of his hands were broken off on the threshold. Only Dagon's torso was left of it. Therefore, neither the priest of Dagon nor anyone who came into Dagon's house tread on the threshold of Dagon and Ashdod to this day. But the hand of the Lord was heavy on the people of Ashdod, and he ravaged them and struck them with tumors, which both Ashdod and its territory. And when the men of Ashdod saw how it was, they said, the ark of the God of Israel must not remain with us, for his hand is harsh towards us and Dagon our God. Therefore they sent and gathered to themselves the lords of the Philistines and said, what shall we do with the ark of the God of Israel? And they answered, let the ark of the God of Israel be carried away to Gath. So they carried the ark of God of Israel away. So it was, after they had carried it away, that the hand of the Lord was against the city, and a very great destruction, and he struck the men of the city, both small and great, with tumors broke out on them. Therefore they sent the ark of God to Ekron. So it was, as the ark of God came to Ekron, the Ekronites cried out, saying, they have brought the ark of God of Israel to us to kill us and our people. So they sent and gathered together all the lords of the Philistines and said, send away the ark of God of Israel, and let it go back to its own place, so it does not kill us, our own people. For there was a deadly destruction throughout all the city, and the hand of God was very heavy there. And the men who did not die were stricken with tumors, and the cry of the city went up to heaven. Okay, so Dagon is the god of the Philistines. What are we doing on time? The meaning of Dagon is uncertain, but it may mean fish or grain. A lot of older sources just take it for granted that it means fish, but that has been brought into question. He is sometimes depicted with the head and torso of a man and the lower body of a fish, but he was a god of grain. And Dagon had another temple in Gaza in Judges 16:23, which Samson destroyed. So he was a major god and probably the Philistines' chief god, mentioned again in 1 Chronicles 10:10 as a very important god for the Philistines. So it was the temple of Dagon that was destroyed at the end of Samson's life. Okay. And here's a couple of pictures, a couple of artist impressions. This isn't really based on anything other than conjecture, but this is a pretty good idea of what that may have looked like. It may be hard to see the image on the left, so more of a line drawing there on the right that you can look at. Again, often depicted with this merman-like tail at the bottom. And they had him sitting up there in their temple where they placed the ark. So the ark comes to Ashdod. Oh, I misspelled Ashdod. Left the D out. The ark is placed in the temple to Dagon, and the idol of Dagon falls on its face for the ark during the night. They set him back up, and the next night Dagon falls on his face with his hand and head cut off. Why did Dagon fall over, and why were his hands and head cut off? Yeah, it took away his ability. He had no, or maybe even kind of represented his ability not to do anything, right? Right. So but let me this way, was this an accident? Was it just a coincidence? I mean, stuff falls over in the middle of the night all the time, right? No. Who did this?
I would say, personally, that it's God, God's Spirit.
Yeah.
Holy Spirit. But also, I mean, when he falls over, that's also, to me, the indication that even this non-God recognizes who the true God is.
Yeah, so when you fall forward on your face, right, that's how you bow down to worship. So, and so you're kind of looking at it from at least symbolically, even though it seems more like God's behind us. I don't feel like Dagon. I don't think we're saying that Dagon said, oh, I'm a real God, but I worship you, so I'm going to bow down to you. But symbolically, it shows Dagon bowing down to our God, showing who's the more powerful. Yeah. But our God seems to be behind this, causing this to happen. Go ahead.
Also, I can't help but think when Jesus is, coming in to Jerusalem and people are crying out about who he is, he says, hey, silence people. He says, even these stones will cry out if I tell them to stop. So I think you see an example of here's some stone.
Yeah.
It's not alive.
Yeah.
And then it's crying out.
Yeah. So if God tells these stones to worship him, these stones will worship God. And so these stones bow down to God as the God. And then there seems to be an escalation here, I think. Right? It starts out, God just tips over. The Philistines think they can just put it back up. God seems to make his point with a little bit of emphasis the second time, right? He takes the head and the hands off the second time it falls. Okay. So God is communicating something to these. He's giving them a message. He's letting them know. Oh, go ahead, Eddie.
And before you get to that question, I know it was going to be your
That's fine.
To me, the irony of the fact that the Philistines had to
Yeah. So this shows that it's just a statue. And even though God commands, the making of the Ark of the Covenant, that we never have a commandment to make an idol of God, right, Tim? And I'm just thinking out loud, but maybe there's a part of that is you invariably wind up in this when you have a representation of God. There's always going to be a point where you've got to kind of treat it in a way that shows it to be an object, and not really what it's the man image that it makes represent. So it seems to me that God is communicating something to the Philistines here by causing this statue to fall over. He's sending them a message. Hey, you do not treat me like I'm just another god that you can put in your pantheon. And when they don't get it the first night, he tells them again more emphatically. So it just sort of makes these personal. Does anyone feel that God has ever communicated his pleasure to you? And I'm not counting when you're reading the Bible and you read a passage and says, oh, wait a minute, I'm not living right. Are there any other ways in which you've experienced anything where it feels like God is getting you back on the right track in maybe a more direct manner? Go ahead.
Well, I can give a personal answer
Sure.
to this. I can't even tell you the number of times after I preach a sermon that I have no thoughts of anybody specific in my head. They're like, you have no idea how much I need that this week.
Okay, so you couldn't hear that as a preacher, as an evangelist, David has taught lessons from the Bible, and it's not anything, we're not talking about a miraculous event, it's just him teaching a lesson and had people come forward afterwards telling him, hey, I really needed that. So the possibility is that, that's from God, right? That God is making sure that we sometimes hear those messages that we need to hear. Because if you just leave it to yourself, right, you might not read the right part of the Bible that you really hear to that moment. But if you leave it to God, then maybe he will lead you to that lesson that you need. It's a possibility, at least. Go ahead, Eddie.
I don't know that I would want to say outside of reading the Bible.
No.
It may not be a direct passage that says, oh, that behavior
Yeah,
was
you're right.
wrong. But I think the only way we can ever know what God is doing is through what he has revealed in his word. Whether it's directly or indirectly, that's the only way we're ever going to be able to identify and say, this is an actual.
Yeah, that's a good point that Eddie makes. The way we know the will of God is through his revealed word. But what about this? Are there ever times when we know the revealed word of God, we're just not doing it, and maybe we need a little push? Maybe we just need a little nudge. Say, wait a minute, you need to do what you know is right to do. Am I the only one that's ever been in that situation?
Certainly.
So, has anyone had an experience where God gave you that push? Go ahead.
I think God gives nasty consequences to things that don't benefit us, and it's sort of like protection in a way.
Yeah.
And I would say I think sometimes those nasty consequences to sin often result in having a little.
Yeah, so if you couldn't hear that, sometimes the natural consequences of sin wind up being that wake-up call. I think probably I've experienced that, probably some of you experienced that as well. Sometimes something bad happens to you, you feel like, wow, I wish that hadn't happened, and then a little later you're like, well, wait a minute. That's what caused me to get back on the right path. And sometimes we may feel that that was God nudging us in that direction. Maybe some of us would feel, no, it was just worked out that way. But it's something that I think about a lot. To what extent does God, because we're always praying to God, right? We're always praying him to do things in our lives. I'm sort of curious what we think the answer to those prayers look like. Do they ever look like this, or do they not? Yeah, go ahead.
Also, this is an important part of having a trusted or friend group, because you can get called out. You can be trying to live, as you say, sort of like knowing how to live, but you're not exactly good at it. But hopefully, one of your trusted friend group will notice it and call you out on it.
Yeah.
And that would be a way that God is communicating his pleasure through somebody who's trusted to say, look, you're not doing this right.
Yeah, so if you couldn't hear that over here, the comment is sometimes the way God communicates that displeasure to us is, not by tipping over the idols in our house, but by just having other Christians around us give us that encouragement and that rebuke that we may need at times.
Just going with that comment too, going back to Ryan's sermon when he visited us a long time ago, we had an adult study where we covered something similar. The idea that, we are, the Spirit dwells in us, and that is the living water.
Right.
And
So we have an important role to helping each other in those ways. Absolutely. Very good comments. I appreciate them all. Any other thoughts before I move on? All right, so the plague. So in verse 6, we read they were tumors. This could have been bubonic plague. That's something a lot of people who've read this have suggested. The Septuagint says disease instead of tumors, and it also says that God sent mice. Now, in the next chapter of the Hebrew text, it is also going to suggest that mice are involved in this, or mice or rats were part of the plague, even though they aren't mentioned in chapters 5, verses 6 and 12 in the Masoretic. But in the Masoretic, in the Hebrew text, in the next chapter, we're going to read, therefore you shall make images of your tumors and images of your rats that ravage the land, and you shall give glory to the God of Israel. Perhaps he will lighten his hand from you, from your gods and from your land. And don't get hung up on the difference between mice and rats. I think it's just sort of translation differences. If you look in like the ESV or the NRSV, it will actually say mice in the next chapter. The New King James Version says rats in chapter 6, but it says the New King James Version of the Septuagint says mice. So when you translate the word from Hebrew to Greek to English, it comes out a little bit differently going straight from Hebrew to English. But the point is that mice are mentioned specifically in the Greek translation in chapter 5. We don't see that here in the Hebrew text, but the chapter 6 seems to imply that mice were part of this plague as well. And I underlined from your gods here when we looked at that passage because I wanted to know, we've already seen that, right? We've seen God's wrath against one of their gods in his destruction of the idol of Dagon. So the ark goes to Gath. The people of Ashdod don't want the ark anymore. The lords of the Philistines decide to send it to Gath. In the Septuagint, the people of Gath volunteered to take the ark. I almost messed this slide up really bad. I had read this text in the Septuagint and had not realized it was different in the Hebrew text. So I actually had some slides up here about how the people of Gath volunteered to take it. It doesn't say that they volunteered to take it in the Hebrew text, but it does have that note in the Septuagint. But the ark causes the plague to come to Gath, so they send the ark to Ekron. And I did want to put a slide up here that shows the differences here in that verse in the Septuagint. It says, therefore they sent and gathered themselves all the lords of the Philistines and said, what shall we do with the ark of God? And they would refer back to the lords of the Philistines. The lords of the Philistines answered, let the ark of God of Israel be carried away to Gath. So they carried the ark of God of Israel away. But in the Septuagint, it says, therefore they sent and brought all of the lords of the Philistines in the same place and said, what shall we do with the ark of the God of Israel? And the people of Gath said, let the ark of the God of Israel come to us. So the ark of the God came to Gath. Just sort of wondering why the Septuagint would say it. Is there any reason why the people of Gath might have wanted the ark? Yeah, so the lords, we'll see this maybe a little more clearly in chapter 6, but there are specifically 5 cities of the Philistines, which is why we're going to see 5 mice in the next chapter when they're trying to make atonement to God for what's happening. They make these images of 5 tumors and 5 mice. So there are 5 cities. They're listed in chapter 6. I think I have on a slide for chapter 6 up here as well, but we'll see the 5 cities specifically named, and each of those cities has a lord over that city. So you're looking at, these are sort of collectively the leaders of the Philistines. And so they're calling them all together to say, hey, what are we going to do? But I'm just curious, is it possible the people of Gath, is the Septuagint crazy, or is it possible the people of Gath wanted the ark? Why might you want the ark? If it's bringing plague. Go ahead. Yeah, so David said it represented a victory over Israel, so it's part of the spoils. It's kind of a trophy, right? This says, we get excited if we just get a banner to hang in our upper arena. I mean, this is a big trophy. Go ahead.
Well, on that too, Goliath is from Gath and the big giant people, so they're like, we're the toughest people around.
So I didn't realize that. Yeah, so Gath has people like Goliath, so big people, so they may feel like they're tougher than this. What else would make you want that Ark of the Covenant? Yeah. Yeah. So there could be some pride. What was the ark made out of? Wood and what else? Gold, right? So it's a trophy of victory. It's a spoil of war. There may be there's some pride that comes in having it in your possession, and it's totally covered all over in gold and has 2 gold cherubim on the top. So it's a valuable thing. So it's possible the people of Gath at this point didn't mind having the ark at all. But by the time it gets, because the plague follows it to Gath, by the time it gets to Ekron, the people are upset. They're actually crying out when it comes, saying, don't bring this here. We don't see, at the very least, we don't see the people of Gath objecting to it. Whether they ask for it or not, they don't seem to object. When it comes to Ekron, at this point, people are saying, don't bring it here, we are going to die. And then when they do start dying, we see them crying out. Some of the commentators point out that the word cry in these 2 verses is not the same. It's getting more intense. The first cry is a word that simply describes their complaint. They're complaining. And in the second verse, it refers to a lament. So as things get worse, they go from complaining about the ark to just lamenting the death that it has brought to their city. Okay, so the people of Gath made no objection to receiving the ark, and according to the Septuagint, they even asked for it. By the time it reached Ekron, the people of Ekron are voicing displeasure. So I just kind of went through those already. Soon the people of Ekron are past complaining. There is a continuous escalation of distress over the ark. It starts out, statues are falling over, and then death in one city, and then death is following the ark from city to city, and it's becoming a bigger and bigger problem. And that leads us into 1 Samuel 6, 1:12. We got 5 minutes, is that right? Let's go ahead and read the text. If we read it tonight, we may not have to read it next time. Chapter 6, verses 1 through 12. Now the ark of the Lord was in the country of the Philistines 7 months, and the Philistines called for the priest and the diviner, saying, what shall we do with the ark of the Lord? Tell us how we should send it to its place. So they said, if you send away the ark of God of Israel, do not send it empty, but by all means return it to him with a trespass offering. Then you will be healed, and it will be known to you why his hand is not removed from you. Then he said, what is the trespass offering which we shall return to him? And they answered, 5 golden tumors and 5 golden rats, according to the number of the lords of the Philistines. For the same plague was on all of you and on your lords. Therefore you shall make images of your tumors and images of your rats that ravage the land, and you shall give glory to God of Israel perhaps, and he will lighten his hand from you, from your gods and from your land. Why then do you harden your hearts as the Egyptians and Pharaoh hardened their hearts when he did mighty things among them? Did they not let the people go that they might depart? Now therefore make a new cart. Take 2 milk cows which have never been yoked, and hitch the cows to the cart, and take their calves home away from them. Then take the ark of the Lord and set it on the cart, and put the articles of gold which you are returning to him as a trespass offering in a chest by its side. Then send it away and let it go. And watch. If it goes up the road to its own territory, to Beth Shemesh, then he has done us this great evil. But if not, then we shall know it was not his hand that struck us and happened to us by chance. Then the men did so. They took the 2 milk cows and hitched them to the cart and shut up their calves at home. And they set the ark of the Lord on the cart and the chest with the gold rats and the image of their tumors. Then the cows headed straight for the road to Beth Shemesh and went along the highway, lowing as they went, and did not turn aside to the right hand or the left. And the lords of the Philistines went after them to the border of Beth Shemesh. Let's see how much we can get through before the bell rings on us. So those mice come up again in verse 6:1. Now the ark of the Lord was in the country of the Philistines for 7 months. That's what it says in the Hebrew text. The Greek text adds to that, and their land was infected with mice. Now after this, from this point forward, the Hebrew text is going to mention the mice as well. But up to this point, all the references to mice are found only in the Septuagint. So after 7 months, the Philistines asked their priests what to do with the ark. The priests decided to add a guilt offering to the ark before returning it to the Israelites. It was 5 gold tumors and 5 gold mice, 1 for each of the cities of the Philistines. So this is actually in verse 17 that we'll read next time. But the cities are Ashdod. I keep leaving that D, A-S-H-D-O-D, out of Ashdod. Ashdod, Gaza, Ashkelon, Gath, and Ekron. So those are the 5 cities of the Philistines. Each one has a lord. 5 is also the number of lords of the Philistines, as we saw all the way back in Judges chapter 3. So is the God of Israel behind these plagues? We notice that there's still a little doubt, right? I won't read this again because we just read through the text, but we saw what happened here was they decided to put the ark on a cart led by some cows, and then if they say, we'll just let it go. And if it takes the ark back to the Israelites, then we'll know that God's been behind all of this. But then they say, if it doesn't go anywhere, we'll know it's just a coincidence. You know, plagues happen all the time in the ancient world. Maybe this isn't actually from God. So they're still not sure about whether this is from God. So let me ask you this. Would you call anything that God has done so far a miracle? Okay, think about that. Think about it. Real quick, one more comment.
I think they would. If they, I just love, it's so sobering in verse 6 where they were priests and diviners. People who serve quote unquote gods are saying, why are you hardening your hearts? He's clearly proven to you that he is the God.
Yeah.
And yet
They
you're
do.
going back to-
They do, but then they come here at the end and they say, well, maybe it's just a coincidence after all.
And that's why we're going with the point. How many times has God proven his goodness and power to us? And we still say, I feel like my idols a little bit more. I'm going to go to them instead.
Yeah. So, but think about this. We'll talk about this some more. I want to look the falling over the statue with its head and hands breaking, a plague of disease, a plague of mice. Would we call that a miracle? We'll talk about that next time. Thank you all.